All right, I think we can start. So welcome everyone. This is the Kubernetes session. And in this session, we're going to discuss what has changed in the past few months in the Kubernetes provider. What are the future plans for the provider regarding the community, and what's the status of the community? So first of all, a quick overview or recap of the last changes or the most important changes of the past few months. Basically, they can be broadly divided in new features that have been implemented, a lot of performance improvements also, because that has been one of the big areas of opportunity, and some notices regarding compatibility of the Kubernetes provider with other related libraries. So if we look at the new features of the past few months, the most important ones probably are that now you can bake Helm charts from Git repositories. So this feature is available since last December in version 1.24. And previously, if you wanted to use the bake manifest stage with Helm charts, you had to package your Helm charts as a tarball or TGC file with Helm package and store this tarball either in a Git repo, in an S3 bucket, or somewhere else. With this new feature, now you can specify your unpackaged Helm charts, so you can store them on the Git repository, and Spinnaker can download this repository and use it for making the deployments. And the other big new feature that we had in the last months was this new UI, which is Kubernetes specific. It's turned off by default, so you need to specify some flags in deck in order to enable this view. And this was released on last February on version 1.25. Maybe the image here is a bit small, but you have in the left pane under the, or together with the clusters, load balancers, and firewalls screens, now you have a new screen, which is Kubernetes. In this new screen, you will see a list of the kinds that are available in the target accounts, and also the objects that belong to each one of these kinds. So again, these features are implemented by the community. It's not just the SIG people that we're implementing this, but since Spinnaker is an open source project, if you have new features that you would like to see in Kubernetes, you can submit pull requests and we can discuss it at the SIG meetings. So thank you for the companies and people that provided these new features. Now for the performance improvements, maybe one of the important ones is the live calls during deployments, which was released on last October, version 1.23. In previous versions of Spinnaker, when you were deploying a manifest, Spinnaker used the cache in order to read some information that was required for the deployment. And this usually had some performance problems because refreshing the cache is a costly operation, especially when you have a lot of Kubernetes accounts. Refreshing the cache may take a few minutes. So this makes that deployments or the pipelines were delaying and taking a few minutes to complete, just waiting for this cache to be refreshed. Now with this change, live calls, Kubernetes or the cloud driver service will make live calls during the execution of these pipelines instead of relying on the cache. And this greatly improves the performance of running the pipelines. So instead of having your pipelines executing in 10 minutes, maybe now they only take 30 seconds or 1 minute. Now for the next performance improvement, filtering Docker repositories. This was released on February, version 25. When you can specify Docker repositories in the configuration for Cloud Driver, If you don't specify specific registries, then CloudDriver will try to read all the registries in the repositories, or that was in previous versions. Now with this change, you can specify regular expressions to filter the names of which registries you want to cache within these repositories. So this allows to have a much linear experience for caching the Docker registries. Now the next performance improvement is using the Git CLI. This was a combined release between February and April. So before this implementation, CloudDriver used the JGit library for communicating with GitHub or for cloning these repositories. But JGit has some drawbacks, some performance penalties, and it was not the ideal solution. One example of this is that JGit library doesn't support shallow clones. That means that you don't clone the full history of a Git repository. And this caused that for users having a large Git repositories, they may have seen timeouts running the bake manifest stage, for example, when you need to download this huge Git repository. So this change, introducing Git CLI, replaces the JGit library with Git binary. Git binary allows you to do shallow clones, and also as part of this change, it was introduced the support for caching the Git repositories. This means that when you are executing a pipeline that has a bake manifest that clones the repository, before this change, this repo was cloned on every execution of the pipeline. Now, after this change, it's only cloned the first time, and it's kept in CloudDriver in disk. And every time the pipeline is run again, it will only do a Git pull to pull the latest changes for that repository. This also greatly improves the performance of running the pipelines with large Git repos. And finally, we have account sharding, which was released just in April for the SQL backend store of CloudDriver. Account sharding allows you to specify or to kind of load balance the accounts that different CloudDriver replicas will be caching. This is also an opt-in feature. It's disabled by default, and you need to enable it and configure it if you want to use it. So the purpose of this change is that before this, if you had, let's say, 5 replicas of CloudDriver, all 5 replicas were caching all the Kubernetes accounts all the time. Now with this account sharding implementation, only or the accounts are divided by the number of CloudDriver replicas. So this means that caching performs much faster and much better. So basically, this is the overview of the performance improvements. Now for compatibility, in the past few months, it was end of life for Kubernetes V1 provider. The last supported version for V1 provider was released in August. For the ones that don't know the V1 provider, that was the previous version of the one that we have today, where you specify the manifest that you want to deploy. In the V1 provider, instead of specifying the manifest, you had a UI for configuring individual parts of the manifest. So it was not possible to specify, for example, CRDs. It was really difficult. And that's why the V2 provider gives you the full flexibility for providing any manifest that you want to deploy. Now for the next point, Java version 11 or more, this support or this Java version was changed or released in October of last year. Previously, Spinnaker was using Java 8, now it uses Java 11. And this one is probably the one of the most important ones, the support for Kubernetes API versions. So this is for supports of deployment targets. If you want to deploy to Kubernetes, which are earlier than 1.1.16, you can only do so with, at most with Spinnaker 125, because in 126, then you won't be able to make deployments to these older API versions. And just for context, this 116 version has been around for a while, and in some cloud providers like AWS or GCP, you are not allowed to create new clusters with older versions. So we're also aligning with this movement of moving forward with the API versions. Okay, future plans from community. We have a couple of points. One of them is replacing kubectl. Today, CloudDriver uses kubectl commands to read the infrastructure and also to make deployments. And this causes sometimes performance penalties, because if you're running this kubectl command, every time that you run it, CloudDriver needs to create some threads to run it. So it's not very optimal, this implementation. There are plans from other companies to replace this kubectl and use instead direct REST API calls. And the other point is opt out of artifact binding. When you have your deploy manifest stage, maybe you have seen that you're able to bind artifacts like Docker images or config maps or secrets. How this actually works is a bit confusing sometimes, because you may have previous executions of the pipeline that may be introducing artifacts that you don't want to be automatically bind to this deployment manifest stage. So one of the future items is to have an option where you can opt out of this automatic binding of artifacts. Again, if you want to see more features, or if you have some ideas, you can share them in the SIG meetings, or you can open pull requests also. And finally, for the status of the SIG and the community, in the past few months, there have been a few changes in SIG leadership. So previously we have Eric and Ethan, who did a really great job. Then in the past few months, basically both members of the SIG have changed, and today it's me and Chuck. For the SIG meetings, if you're interested in joining, we have these meetings every other Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern. You can find the details in the Spinnaker governance repository, which has the link for the appointment. Actually, next Tuesday, we're going to host the next Kubernetes SIG meeting. And finally, reviewers and approvers. Spinnaker is an open source project, so it benefits from the contributions from all the community. We need reviewers and approvers, because it's not just one person or two person, the one that is able to approve pull requests and merge them. There are some requirements so anyone can be a reviewer or approver. Requirements vary. For example, you need to have submitted some pull requests, and you need to have reviewed some pull requests. If you're interested in becoming a reviewer and approver, you can follow the instructions or the process that is also specified in the governance repo. Again, all contributions are welcome. And I think that's it for this part of the talk. So now I will open the floor for any discussion, things that, any comments from the audience. So maybe I will ask you, what do you want to see in the Kubernetes provider? What will be useful for you?
It does look like we may have one question about how to enable details to the Kubernetes experimental UI features. Armand, do you want to cover that, or I can?
Chuck, can you talk about it?
Sure. So I think the best way to do that would probably be to take a look at the most recent pull requests for that. And if you check next week, we will work on getting a link to get you some good information there. So thank you.
Yeah, I think there's a flag that you need to configure in deck. I don't remember which is that flag, but you can use it to see this new UI. And again, this is experimental, so it may have some improvements. Are there any other comments or questions? Maybe I can ask you, which are the pain points that you have experienced with the Kubernetes provider? Or has it worked well in your case? Well, I think that's anything I wanted to cover. Chuck, I don't know if you want to talk about something else.
I think we're all good. And we've got 10 minutes till the top of the hour, but well, let's give that back, and everybody have a great day. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, everyone.